people are constantly raising the bar.
Sacrifices need to be made.
What would you guys say are your biggest weaknesses?
You or your enemy right now?
Is success a lie?
Just a fucking podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I'm back with Dr Helms. If you don't know who Dr Helms is, you're probably committing a crime against humanity, but that's fine. So Dr Helms is one of the coaches from 3DMJ, 3D Muscle Journey. So if you don't know who they are, again, crime against humanity. So you should probably listen to the first podcast we did, because that sort of sets the stage, tells you who Eric is, and sort of goes around a lot of the background between that. But Eric, do you want to give us a quick rundown of who you are, what you do, and what you generally do in fitness?
Yeah, for sure. First, thanks for having me back on, man.
My pleasure.
What I do is I'm essentially what I would describe as a science communicator to the lifting community. And my personal mission statement and goal is to help both recreational and competitive strength athletes and physique athletes find a sustainable way to performance. So that a lot of times comes down to finding greater emphasis on the journey than the outcome, more emphasis on enjoying the process and having it incorporated into your life. So that's why I'm personally a drug-free lifter, and why at 3D Muscle Journey we coach drug-free athletes. So that's kind of what I do, and I'm basically the R&D, research and development and science arm of 3D Muscle Journey. So we're a collective of coaches, and our operations manager, Andrea, and myself, I do coaching as well as making sure that the team is up to date with the best processes and information. Bit of my history, I'm basically just the guy who started lifting weights about 15 years ago or so. Fell in love with it, both the intellectual and emotional pursuit and everything related to it, made it my lifestyle. And since then, I've competed in over 20 powerlifting meets, 3 weightlifting meets pretty poorly, 9 bodybuilding shows, and coached a couple hundred people to the stage at the platform, and probably in total, Gen Pop plus competitors I've worked with or consulted with, maybe 1,000 people at this point.
Wow.
Something stupid like that. And I'm also a researcher here at AUT, at the Sports Performance Research Institute in New Zealand, with an emphasis on bodybuilding and powerlifting related research from a performance psychology, nutrition, and training perspective. So yeah.
Sweet, fantastic. So that's the general background. So I thought what we'd do, just to start off, just to get a little more background on who is Dr Helms.
Sure. I
thought we'd do a little quickfire round. So basically, when you answer the questions, answer as minimal as possible. So what's your favorite color?
Blue.
3DMJ, lovely.
Yeah.
And what is your current diet?
I eat a pretty balanced diet that is protein centric, and I've been trying for ethical reasons to reduce the animal food content in it. But fruits, veg, protein.
Sounds good.
Eat when I'm hungry.
Sounds good. And then who's your favorite coach or coaching team outside of 3DMJ?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm a big fan of the strength athlete. That's Bryce Lewis and his team of coaches. They do great work in drug-free powerlifting.
Yeah. And then what would be your favorite podcast outside of the Student Side Hustle or 3D Muscle Journey?
I'm a big fan of Sigma Nutrition. Danny Lennon does a great job on there.
I heard that one that you recommended a while ago about, I think it was about digesting science or something. Absolutely phenomenal. And then who's one person who's not that well known in fitness or on Instagram or wherever, or bodybuilding in general, that you think should be more well known?
I'd say James Krieger.
Yep.
He's the man.
And then what would be your favorite exercise outside of barbell sports?
Favorite exercise? So not a barbell, or?
Oh, so can't be anything, no resistance training, nothing body weight, can't be calisthenics, nothing to do with lifting weights.
Basketball.
Basketball, okay, cool. And then I think we'll get into more the, this is something that I want to sort of base this episode of the podcast around, and something that I think you're quite a good person to explain and help people understand. So this is one thing that you helped open my mind to, is why you have to view a lot of things in grey, and then rather than just purely black and white. So why is that necessary in general when it comes to fitness, life, education, studying, all of it? And then when should you view things in black and white?
Well, I think it's necessary just because few things are actually black and white. Like binary code is black and white. That's O's and ones. Things that only have one or two decisions are. But if we're talking about human behavior or context-dependent things like when you should do exercise or physiology, which is many processes together, which maybe in isolation could be binary in some cases. But when you're looking at the complex dynamic system, it's absolutely not black and white. So I think to become an expert in anything, you have to be willing to understand the complexities of something, the context, dive in very deep, and then come out of it and be able to make generalized statements about that thing that you spent years learning about in different situations and contexts. That said, I do think it's important to be able to give advice and provide value before you're an expert. And this is a tough one, because before you're an expert, you don't know what you don't know, and it takes a little bit of time just to realize your own ignorance. So this is the Dunning-Kruger effect, the idea that as you learn more about a topic, you understand what you don't know, but before you've even done much of a dive at all, you don't understand the depth of something. So I think as a general rule for people, it's a really good idea to be very humble in areas that you're not an expert in. And anything that you are an expert in, like we all get caught up in this. So for example, I would say after 15 years of lifting and coaching and studying and writing, I would consider myself an expert.
That's a fair judgment to make, I think.
Well, it's one thing. It's like bodybuilding and powerlifting, right? So, and if I realize that something as ridiculous as flexing on stage in a Speedo or a posing suit, or trying to move a metal bar, a matter of inches, the most amount of times you can to an arbitrary movement standard with judges, and competing in that, if things that silly can have 15 years of depth to study, that means other things certainly have at least that level of depth. So for example, when I get asked about politics, or when I get asked about anything outside of my field in academics, or if I have an opinion on something, I try to remind myself, you probably don't know what the hell you're talking about, and at best I have a cursory understanding. At best I have like the Wikipedia level knowledge about something.
Right.
So with that said, kind of taking this back to fitness, if you're someone who has not spent a decade learning something, that doesn't mean you can't help anyone or you should just paralyze yourself. I think it's a good idea just to be humble and focus on the big rocks. It doesn't take forever to learn progressive overload. It doesn't take forever to learn specificity. It doesn't take forever to learn energy balance and those basic concepts and things like sustainable lifestyle change. Having those concepts and having a bit of experience, you can still be incredibly valuable to people who are just getting started, or people who have serious concerns that have basic answers, which is most of fitness. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but that's my thoughts.
What about, because I find one thing that I've been struggling a lot myself, and I think I've been getting a lot of guidance from people like Steve from Revive Stronger, when it comes to ego around that, and ego around the more you learn and the more you view yourself as closer to an expert and managing that, because I find it very difficult to hold myself back in a way when it comes to, say for instance, if I see someone doing something obviously wrong or that I just can't see any merit to, I find it hard to not fix it or not. And I think it comes from a place of ego and a place of lack of self-control. But especially with yourself, I would say that you're definitely one of the experts in bodybuilding and powerlifting. Like, I don't think there's much debate about that. And do you find it, say just with friends and family, or just general people, when they haven't come to you for advice, do you find it hard to sort of hold yourself back from giving them advice?
Absolutely. And first, let me just say the fact that you're evaluating where that comes from, what the motivation behind it means you're a step ahead of a lot of other people. Yeah, especially on the internet, where you don't have to actually experience the confrontation, look someone in the eye.
Yeah.
You can have whatever tone you want. You get to get away with all these things that people would never do in person, where they'd be far too afraid socially to have that kind of confrontation. It's commonplace where you, like, I don't like your shirt. Like, you see comments like that all the time. So part of it is just this need to speak your mind and feel relevant, and having that just kind of happen off the cuff. And another part is, when you have a genuine desire to improve the fitness scene, for example. If you're, I think a good way to deal with that, and a good rubric to decide when to act, is to assess what your goals are. So if your goals are to, let's say, improve the practice in fitness, then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the best way to do that? Is having a random person call you out when you're incorrect publicly the best way to do that? Well, if your goal is to have that person change their behavior, probably not. We know that people, when challenged publicly, are more likely to dig their heels in. We know that unsolicited advice is rarely received well. People have to be in a place to receive advice. I mean, if people knew better, they would do better. That's the reality. It's not like people are willingly and consciously doing something incorrect in 99% of cases. So the threshold should be based on what do you really think is going to be most likely to make a positive change. So when I look at something, if there is a broad misconception that a lot of people are buying into, I will often make a video, a post, or address that in some way, rather than try to correct the person. I think bringing attention to it, dispelling a misconception, talking about something in depth, educating people is a really good way to do that. It also creates a bunch of people who will now go around and talk about that, so it can have a shift. That said, I do think there's a time and a place to actually say, no, that is wrong, and even to say, I think what you're doing is harmful. And the answer to that is when someone is promoting something that is harmful. Most of the time, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, when someone is promoting something that's harmful, they don't know that they're doing that. Sometimes they just don't care and they're trying to profit off of it.
That's what it feels like the majority of the time, because I feel, especially in fitness, it feels as though it's like 3DMJ plus others versus the world, and it's like, it's disheartening at times, because I feel as though there's a lot of people just trying to profit, and it's like, I can't understand the rationale why you would make your life's work something that is genuinely immoral.
I think the answer is 90% of the time they're not aware that they're doing the wrong thing. I think never ascribe intentionality to what incompetence can explain. It's the same kind of thing behind conspiracy theories. Do we really think that a government that can't keep its poor people fed, or keep its checkbooks balanced, or can't prevent levees from cracking, can create a top-down conspiracy that will last 50 years? Almost 99% of the time the answer is no, it's not the case. All it takes is a couple of people, and especially with iPhones everywhere. It's a nonsensical idea. That's why they're silly, and we laugh about them, a lot of these conspiracy theories. The same thing is true when you see someone who has the genetic gift of being very attractive, being well-spoken, and has way too much confidence in their level of knowledge. They are promoting something that works for them, or that they at least think is neutral, won't be necessarily beneficial or harmful, and that's an opportunity for them to make money. So I think there's some of that going on. People who are like, I'm just selling something that it may or may not work, but whatever. But I rarely do I see people purposefully promoting something that is harmful. Like anti-vaxxers they don't get together and go, we got all these suckers to not get vaccines because we hate humans, They actually believe that. So I think 90% of the time is a lack of understanding and speaking past one's own knowledge and inadvertently doing harm.
Right.
So anytime you approach someone who is inadvertently doing harm, or even worse, trying to do benefit but is actually doing harm, and you attack them as though they are intentionally trying to do harm, they're not going to receive that well.
Right, because they don't see it as, that's not their worldview or their story they're telling themselves.
Exactly. You come off as a bully.
Yes.
Regardless of whether or not they are actually doing harm. So I think if you don't approach people with respect and human dignity, you're very unlikely to make a change. There's the argument that you do create awareness among others, but I think these very influential large people with large followings, they get a lot of people who see them as someone to aspire to, or a leader of their quote-unquote tribe, if you will. So when that's attacked, it's like it might as well be a personal attack. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to convert the 2,000 followers I have by, or show them the light by attacking someone with 2 million followers, the question is are you doing more harm than good? Are you making more people dig their heels in than positive? And I'm not saying don't ever call people out. Don't point out false information. But there is a way to do it that is less likely to create a backfire effect.
Right.
And also, if it is a 3DMJ and other people like us versus the world, that's not the way fitness works. We're not trying. Fighting other people in fitness is the most ridiculous thing. We're all trying to, improve health, improve fitness, and promote better living. The fact that there's so much drama in fitness, I think, is. Honestly, if someone is out there and their primary thing is promoting drama and fitness or doing call-out videos, they're not in fitness. No. They're just someone who happens to lift weights who's still in a high school. To be honest. So I think I don't know that people who that's entertainment. That's not actually health or fitness. Yeah. So it's not even really comparable in my opinion.
I think even if, like, I won't name names, but I got in an argument with someone the other day because and maybe I shouldn't have, but. They're a reasonably close friend of mine, and they were promoting a natural test booster, and I basically said to them, I DM'd them, I didn't call them out or anything, because and I just sort of said, I think you're being led, I don't know what the phrase is, you're being led down the wrong path and you're being lied to effectively, and I basically said, I think you are being misled very strongly, and it got to a point where she was like, no, I disagree, I think you should try it, and I think that we got to a point where I was sort of like, okay, there's nothing I can do here, that's fine, but it's still I don't know why it stresses me out so much to know that it is still there. But maybe the thing is, how can I even know that that people like yourself, AJ Morris, how can I know that is the right way? Because I guess there's so many things, and it could all be coincidence. But
well, yeah, I think the right path is just to not look for the right versus the wrong people to follow, right?
But I feel like even
you kind of have to put your faith in experts to some level.
Yes.
But there is definitely a way to tell the difference between someone who is more likely to give you information versus someone who's more likely to give you misinformation. You can tell whether or not someone is a rational thinker based on their language.
What sort of indications would...
Great question. Yeah, so... if someone speaks with a lot of superlatives, always, never, if they speak in black and white terms, that probably means they don't understand the complexity or depth of something. Right. They're at the best case scenario, they are just very narrow in their scope. If their whole perspective is how to be the most optimal bench presser and nothing else, and they expect all their followers to be the same way, there might be a little more black and white statements. But if they're a broader, if they have a broader base of audience and a broader message, then there should be a lot of context to address that. So if you're someone who's speaking in always and nevers, if they don't cite references or resources, if they don't speak in probabilities, If they just say
Right.
this is right or this is wrong, if they don't say, this is probably accurate
Yeah.
or this is unlikely to be the case.
Right.
So you want to look for probabilistic speech. You want to look for rare use of superlatives like always, never, the most, things like that. You want to look for people who change their minds.
Right.
You want to look for people who say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then when asked questions that are outside of their scope, instead of trying to manufacture something, they recommend other people for you to check out. You want to look for people who don't present themselves as a guru. And what I mean by guru is that all answers should come from them. They have an authoritarian tilt. They speak from a place of ego. If they're someone who focuses more on self-aggrandizement versus information, I think that's something to look out for. Like if the ratio of like selfies to informational-based content is skewed in the wrong direction, they either don't have much more value to add than the way they look, or they care more about how you perceive them than the information they can give you.
Yes.
And I mean that's a phase a lot of people go through, and that's understandable, or it could be related to insecurity. It's not always malicious. It's in fact rarely malicious, in my opinion. But I think what you should be looking for is people who promote learning, even in the quote unquote like evidence-based community. People who just constantly give you facts, that's great, but it's like playing whack-a-mole if you're going to constantly try to look at each incorrect fact and correct it.
Yes.
Right? So for the example, someone says, hey, D-aspartic acid is a great test booster. And you go, hey, this latest systematic review published last year suggests that there is no significant effect, and sometimes it actually shows a decrement in testosterone. Okay, tomorrow you're going to deal with the same claim. A different claim and have to do the same thing. I would say that you probably want to follow people who also teach you how to do critical thinking. How do you read research better? Where do you get good information from? Instead of attacking each individual supplement claim based on what someone else told you who you see as evidence-based, maybe you follow someone who suggests, hey, check out the position stands of the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition.
Right.
They're free, they're open access, there's like 20 of them. You can read the whole article or check out examine.com. It's like the Wikipedia of supplements.
Right.
And then you can start promoting those things so that instead of having to address individual knowledge bases all the time, you're actually empowering people to perhaps be able to form their own opinions.
Right, so then they can go and learn for themselves instead of having to, like, I think what's made my journey as a lifter quite fulfilling is the fact that I felt like I've learned, and now I feel as though I could obviously teach others, but I feel like I haven't learned all of it, and I feel like now there's rationale behind the majority of things that I do. Like, for example, I just started doing, I think it was on Monday or something, I don't know. I did banded leg press for the first time ever, and I'd never done it before, and it blew me away by how effective it felt, and I found that the rationale made sense to me, and especially for my context, it made perfect sense, because can't squat, I might never squat again just to make a point, and I found having that rationale was very reassuring, and I like the fact that if you take guidance from the right people, they teach you the rationale, they teach you how to get your own rationale.
Yeah.
And that I think is insanely valuable. One thing is, have you read Ego is the Enemy?
No, I've heard really good things about it though.
It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
I agree with that statement, although I'm sure the book goes into a lot more depth.
It's like my Bible. I've literally read it like 8 times. I want to get it like tattooed on me. Like, it is just fantastic. One thing that I would like to speak about, and I think you've promoted this a lot. I'm not sure if you have done it as much recently, but I know you've promoted a lot of you sort of tried to show people, look, this is what people can do naturally. This is what people, like, the Alberto Nunez's exist. Like, they're real. It's not a conspiracy from the top down. Like, that's the thing.
Yes, you can be 158 pounds at 5'9" and be lean. It's incredible, I know.
Like, and like,
steroids don't make you have a lot of veins, believe it or not. They grow muscle, not a vascular system.
And even we just look at WNBF Worlds, like the caliber that you see there, it just blows your mind. Like if you've seen, I forgot his name, Ben Howard?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's just, there's so many, and he's not the only one. Like, there's tons of people like him, and it's like, obviously it's hard. It's not that easy, but I think...
Yeah, that's we're talking the best pros in the world. That's WNBF Worlds for sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then one thing that I would like you to sort of lay down some fire on is how do we know that, I'm not sure the actual names, but the dudes in the 1930s, how do we know that they were natty? And how do we know that they weren't secretly importing steroids from Germany or something or whatever? Or
Well, in the 1930s, there weren't really steroids in Germany until like 38, I think, was when, 36 was when methyl 1 test became orally available, and 38 was when testosterone propionate became available. And when I say available, I mean you need like 10,000 pounds of bull testicles to make enough for a small case study. And no one in the world had actually done a human trial on non-hypogonatal men. And this is a time when there was not transatlantic phone calls or flights that were commercially available. You couldn't go on Google or the internet or translate things. So there were probably 50 people in the world in 1936 who were aware of what testosterone was and what it could do, and they were all in like the European chemistry community, you know.
Right.
So the idea that some person in the 30s was taking it is preposterous. More importantly, it wasn't until late 1945 when a guy named Russell Marker created he actually created this process in the early 40s. It's called the marker degradation. So like I said, you used to need 10,000 pounds of animal testicles to make like 10 milligrams of testosterone. And then you have to put testosterone in some other form, because if you put straight testosterone in your body, it has a half-life of minutes, so
Right.
it's basically ineffective. Yeah. So that's why they methylate it to take it orally, or they put it in these various different forms for injectable use. Or back in the day, they used to use like pellets that would subdermal pellets that would slowly absorb into your skin. So anyway, it wasn't until the Mexican steroid industry started, and then in the late 40s, this is basically how female contraception came around.
Right.
The birth control pills, the marker degradation, they used Mexican yams as a cheaper way to convert into hormones. And this got extended to testosterone in the late 40s. And all of a sudden, the price drastically fell. And this was, from this point on, there was actually the financial feasibility to produce this. And then that's when you started to see, in the early 50s, some of the more clinically useful forms of testosterone became produced. I think in the day or before or after Christmas, 1953, testosterone enanthate got FDA approved.
Right.
And basically late 40s, early 50s is when there actually became a normal market, like a large-scale production and sale through pharmaceutical companies of steroids. And that from that point on, that's when like a gray market or a black market happened. The first report of anyone ever using anabolic steroids for performance enhancement or physique enhancement would be arguably 1952.
Right.
And that would have been the Russian team using it in the Olympics.
Right.
The Russian weightlifting team. And there's like basically three corroborated ways of looking at this. The testosterone enanthate, which was the first true long-acting ester, was produced in Europe. I think the patent was a few years earlier, so it got produced in the early 50s. There was a statistical analysis done in the 80s of looking at when there was a jump in performance in Olympic weightlifting.
Right.
And sometime between 1952 and 1956, the Russian team had a statistically quote-unquote aberrant jump. So all of a sudden they make a big progress.
Yeah.
And then you saw other countries start to make similar jumps in the late 50s and early 60s,
Right.
which is when there were reports of becoming much more mainstream. And then there were also reports, historical documents, interviews of the American team doctor speaking to the Russian coach. And I might have that wrong. Maybe the coach talking to the doctor. I can't remember. I think it was Ziegler. Yeah. So it was I think the U.S. team doctor speaking to the Russian coach at the 1954 World Championships, and the story is that he told him, at 52 is when we were using steroids. So it's possible, since that was like institutionalized use at a team level, that late 40s, early 50s in Russia.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, the first report in the States was 54. So they learn this, they come home, and they start using some of the first forms of testosterone. So before 53, it's really, really unlikely, just because there weren't long-term acting esters. There wasn't a cultural awareness that they were a performance-enhancing drug, and there wasn't yet a market for there to be a gray or black market. Right. It is theoretically sort of kind of crazily conspiracy theory level possible that, say, 1946 to 1952 it could have happened. Right. But it is
so unlikely.
And it's never been reported. There's no reason to think that would be the case.
Right. And there wasn't one guy who just...
Right.
It wasn't one guy at 250 pounds shredded.
Like. No, I mean, and it just wouldn't really... Like, there's no reason... Like, none of the data would point you in that direction. So a good way to kind of check yourself is if you see a physique in 1948 and you go, you had to be that one guy. It's like, well, maybe you have a bias. Like there's no evidence that would lead to that. But even more importantly is that the physiques from 1945, 46 and earlier, which we know 100% had to be drug-free because there was no ability to have access to anabolic steroids, rival the physiques of modern-day natural bodybuilders. It's not to say that you can't get on gear early and there's people who are on gear who have poorer physiques than some natural people. Yes. I mean, that's fair. That's just the way it is.
Not everyone looks like Ben Howard.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you look at 1941, John Grimmick, when John Grimmick stopped dieting to try to make the light heavies for Olympic weightlifting. He competed at the 1936 Olympics actually, and just focused on bodybuilding. He was on stage. I think he was 5'8" or 5'9" at 220 pounds in 1941. Now he wasn't shredded like they are, but if you look at his estimated, it's probably had a body fat percentage between 10 to 15%. That's crazy. That's like a fat-free mass index of 30. And that was in a time where it was physically impossible for him to be on gear. Now, obviously, it's harder to maintain that kind of muscle mass when you're leaner, but there are still incidences of people who are that big, that freaky looking. I post them all the time, on my Instagram, just so people can
check themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that anyone who looks like that's drug-free, but the point is it's possible.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like there's a point where you kind of had to believe people. And I'm not sure, are you familiar with Josh Bridgman and TM Cycles? No. They're a great example of using steroids correctly, if there's a thing.
Sure.
Because Josh, he just did his first, and he's doing it, he's telling everyone he's doing it, so I'm not exposing him or anything.
Sure. Yeah.
This is well known. And he's trained naturally for 7 years. He was a diamond something, very, very, very good natural bodybuilder, did physique for a long time, and now he's moving to classic and he's getting on the juice. And he's just doing it in a very, very intelligent way. Do you know Callum Muscle Mentors? No, he's doing it. He's good friends with AJ Morris and all that, but he's quite reputable. And I just think there's fantastic ways to do it, and Josh will be a great example of someone who maybe his genetics are great, maybe they're all right, but you can see where he is naturally. There's pretty adamant proof that's how it was. And then you'll see in his first cycle, he'll gain whatever amount, and then he'll be an IFBB pro in 2 years. And I think it's very interesting to see that actually happen, and that happen honestly, which is fantastic, because maybe he's only got 20k followers, which I guess is still quite a lot.
Oh, sure.
But it's it's good to see that, and I'm quite confident that he's not secretly being on the juice or anything, just because you see, I think one primary thing that I like to look at is just how fat do they get in their off season. That's one thing, and that's a pretty good indicator. If they're you look at some IFBB pros and they look like they could compete on their off season, and it's a bit. And
I think that's just more of the sign of the times. IFBB pros used to get really fat in the 90s. You ever see pictures of Lee Priest?
Nowadays they just want to stay shredded for Instagram.
No, I don't think so. I think it's just an awareness that the bulking cutting is not as effective.
Right.
But yeah, this is a good contemporary example, but there's tons of examples of this. You know, Greene competed in the WNBF when he was 19, 18, and 20-year-old, if I recall correctly.
Right.
And then he competed in the Team Universe, and I think he got his pro card at around 220 pounds. And then
Team Universe is a natural show.
It's an NPC natural show. So, and then people are like, well, he was on then too, and I'm like, there's nothing you can do after you've been on cycle. I mean, I'm obviously not a steroid expert, but from talking to my friends and the people I know who are on the enhanced side of bodybuilding,
yes,
you don't get to have been on enough gear to get to the point where you're like established and then gain 70 pounds. Like they're not magic, you know. Ronnie Coleman's another example. There's a lot of people who will state that he got his pro card when he was drug free, and then he got on gear, and he also gained like 70 pounds on his stage weight. You don't go from being on some gear to a lot of gear and gain 70 pounds. That's going on from nothing to everything, you know. And is it that surprising that someone like Kai Greene or Ronnie Coleman, arguably some of the best bodybuilders that have ever walked the planet, are that freaky naturally?
Yeah.
No, like
that's the thing. It's
like, do we really think, like, if Ronnie Coleman had been natural his entire life, he'd be 160 pounds? Do you think he'd be 130 pounds lighter on stage?
Yeah.
Probably not. I think he'd be maybe 70 pounds lighter, which is an incredible response to anabolic steroids, and being 5'10", 5'11", 220 pounds on stage is still incredible, you know? So, I mean, if you look at, there's people who've made that transition a number of times. Sean Clarita was top 1 or 2 lightweight WNBF competitor, and now he is really, really good under 202 division. Right. So, and he, I think, went from like competing in the low 130s, very short guy, to now competing around 160, something like that. As a percentage of body weight gain, that's huge, you know. That's a good example of someone who looked really, really freaky and then went to being really, 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 really freaky, you know. So, yeah, I mean, there's been a ton of transitions like that. John Meadows talks about how I think he's made the transition when he was around 20, and he could squat 500 pounds, bench 365, and he was, you know, and I don't think John Meadows has like perfect genetics for bodybuilding. Being able to squat 500 pounds at 20 is really, really impressive. Yeah. But there are certainly people who are
more impressive. There's always freaks out there, and that's the thing. It's like some people are just, and then even with the people in the 1930s, it's like you look at them, and I guarantee they weren't training perfectly. They don't have the literature we have now and all they're probably doing a lot of things right, but it's
big rocks were definitely in place.
Yeah, like imagine if they did everything correctly as well, plus the guarantee they didn't have gear. Like, then what could they have looked like? And then that's basically naturals of today.
Yeah, there was a few extreme examples of people approaching a 2 times bodyweight overhead press back in the 1800s through early 1900s, because bench press wasn't really a thing. And they didn't have them, nor did they have squat racks that could really support a lot of weight. So when you looked at a lot of the impressive numbers, they were deadlifts and overhead press. Right. There's a guy, Herman Gorner, who it's a little sketchy what his body weight was. It's anywhere from somewhere between like 220 to 260. So for non-Americans, that's like 100 kilos to up to 120 kilos. That might have been his body weight. The thing is though, deadlift doesn't get easier as you get heavier after a certain point, because you're just getting farther away from the ground and you have to reach around your own gut. That's why the world record is set in the 105s in the IPF, not the 120s or the super heavies. Right. But anyway, he deadlifted 793 pounds in the late 1800s. Or was it early 1900s? But point is, 20 years before the word testosterone was even in the dictionary. And then, like I said, there have been people who've approached the 2 times bodyweight overhead press, which those are staggering numbers, you know. And it's just, they have been surpassed today, which doesn't surprise me, as we have 7 billion people on the planet now. And there was, 1 or 2 billion on the planet, depending on if we're talking about the 1800s or the early 1900s. So, yeah, I think it's just, again, it comes down to humility and understanding that you might not know the depth of something. Like if you're a young teen or early 20s and you've only been training for a couple years and your only exposure to what you supposedly believe is natural or not is what some other 19 or 20-year-old or 21 or 22-year-old is telling you based on pictures without any kind of objective information, maybe they're wrong half the time.
Yeah.
You know? So
Like, I've sort of experienced it myself. Like, the way I can make myself look on Instagram is much different to how I look in real life. So it's like, that's a...
turn up the structure, baby.
yeah, let's put that shit at 100. And it's like, that's something that's made me realize, like, oh shit, now imagine if you... I'm probably not even doing it correctly. Now imagine if you did everything correctly, maybe you used a little Photoshop, maybe you got perfect pump, like...
He's not on gear, he's just literally doesn't look like that because it's Photoshop. Yeah.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. It's like...
Which is probably worse, you know?
That's, yeah, it's definitely worse.
Yeah, it's not illegal though, so yeah.
Yeah, it's just deceptive, but that's fine.
Yeah.
That is completely fine. So, one thing that I would like to touch on is, so, how much time do we have?
As much as you want, baby.
Sweet, cool. So, where's my notes? There we go. So, one thing I'd like to touch on is mental health and bodybuilding. So, I think, say, using me as an example, I would say I probably live a relatively balanced life. But I do think I don't enjoy socializing that much. I'll go out to parties and stuff though. I'll go outside, go out in the town, all that. Hang out with friends. I will cheat on my diet, and it's not really a cheat because I've never done a cut, so I don't feel as though I'm cheating, and there's no guilt associated with that. So maybe that's relatively healthy. But then do you think there's a lot of things that we think are healthy, or the bodybuilders, I'd say bodybuilders in particular, maybe powerlifters as well, I'm not too clued in on powerlifting because I don't have the best, but do you think there's things that we can do, that probably aren't that healthy, but we as bodybuilders a lot of the time will do and consider them healthy, but then we'll realize a long way down the path that, oh shit, it's probably not the best for my mental health and my just general relationship with my body.
Yeah, I haven't seen mainstream bodybuilding be about health for maybe 60, 70 years. I don't even know that most people into bodybuilding are necessarily primarily concerned about health. And by the way, if you're following bodybuilders and your main concern is health, that confuses me, These are, especially like in, I would not, honestly, even in the natural world, it's primarily not. The dieting down to look the way you need to compete in bodybuilding, whether you're taking anabolic steroids or not, or other drugs, is not healthy. That's why bodybuilders can't and don't sustain minimal levels of body fat year round. And I think a lot of people are looking to maintain the leanest physique they can. And a lot of the time, their idea of how lean they'd like to be is far below what's healthy or reasonable. They're trying to sustain something that would require them to have a constant sense of restriction of what they can eat, sense of restraint, a constant food focus. They might be in a state of relative energy deficiency, so they would probably see a reduction in their total energy expenditure through metabolic adaptation, probably a reduction in their normal testosterone levels. They might even have slightly poor sleep, all kinds of stuff. So I think, going back to your question about the 30s, the 1900s and the 1800s, before the word bodybuilding was around, it was called physical culture. Physical culture was about pushing yourself as hard as you could and attaining peak levels of fitness across a broad level of disciplines. Right. Because there was a belief that was kind of borrowed from the Greeks that pushing yourself physically would lead yourself to pushing yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and that it was holistic improvement.
Do you think there's a certain sport, the one that jumps to mind is CrossFit or something similar, that still does that or still encompasses that culture?
It's closer. I don't know that most CrossFitters, especially like competitive CrossFitters, think about, I'm doing this because it makes me a better human. Right. I think a lot of athletes, when they get more mature, realize that. But I think without being intentional about it, it easily can subvert the other. Yes. If you're interested in health and you're following someone who diets down to a level where they have a clinical eating disorder, which is just a biological reality of getting shredded, and you have to then transition back to having a normal relationship with food. That's the biggest. That's why bodybuilding's hard.
Would you say effectively pretty much 99 or 90% of people who prep end up having to really struggle to get that back, or to get just even the way that I think about food nowadays? And I guess maybe it's something to do with my hormones, where I've been bulking for the 3 years and I've never gotten to the point where I haven't. Like, I can't remember the last time where for a week straight up and like, oh, I can't wait to eat. Like, that's just never happened, and I don't think I'll be at that point for a long time. But do you think 90% of people who go extreme either way, bulking or cutting, end up having to reel themselves in and figure out what it's like to be normal again?
Yeah, I think yeah, you kind of lose a little bit of that sense of what your natural hunger signals are. And I think that's something you don't necessarily need to listen to them all the time, or just whatever they tell you to do. You might have goals that conflict with whatever you're, like if you're trying to get really, really lean for the stage or diet down to a weight class, you're going to have to be hungry. There's typically no way around that. Likewise, if you're trying to put on a lot of body weight and you find that hunger just goes away at a certain point, you're going to have to eat past the point of hunger to facilitate that process. Not always, but in many cases. So that's fine, but you just have to understand that you want to get back to a point where you're considering what your hunger and satiety levels are, because if you spend a lot of time not paying attention to them, then you kind of have to relearn that process, which can cause problems. And I think a lot of people in the fitness industry lose touch with how to maintain their level of fitness or their physique or achieve their goals without controlling those aspects.
Right.
Versus trying to realistically gauge, if I get more in tune with my hunger and my satiety, what's a reasonable physique I can maintain.
Right.
And a lot of times it might be a guy who's just not willing to accept that they have to walk around at 15 or 16% body fat, and they want to be 12 no matter what. And you might be able to find the kind of lifestyle that allows that, but it might not be what's healthy for you. So you have to make a decision of whether you want to be food focused and sacrifice your health slightly to like the way you look. And then I would say, well, if there's no health benefit to being 12% body fat over 16% body fat, and it's just the aesthetic subjective opinion, maybe you need to reassess what your values are. Like, would Gandhi have been a better person if he was more muscular and had abs? Like, maybe we have value beyond the way we look. So that's what I'm talking about with the kind of the idea of the physical culture is saying, hey, I acknowledge that I'm someone who likes to express myself in life physically. I want to push myself. I want to have barriers to push. I like being stronger. I feel empowered. Whatever you get out of lifting, awesome.
Yes.
And then having that be something a little deeper, or at least a little more holistic, that comes into your intellectual life, your spiritual life, if that's something you care about, or has value for your emotional health and sanity.
Right.
So yeah, I think a complete focus on the physical at the cost of health, and at the neglect or detriment to a social life, or in all the other things is it's not healthy.
Yeah.
Or it's at least less healthy than having a more balanced focus. I don't judge people for that, and I've gone through periods where that's all I focused on myself as well. I mean,
At the time, were you aware, or did you?
I just didn't think of it that way.
Right.
You know, I thought of everything in the way of how does this make me the optimal bodybuilder, and ironically, most of the time when you sacrifice something to be optimal, it's not optimal.
Yes, I agree.
Because you're not respecting the fact that you're human.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're just typically being short-sighted or narrow-minded. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to pretend that some well-balanced or slightly better balanced natural bodybuilder can beat Mr. Olympia on stage. Like, That's not a 100% rule. Like, anytime you sacrifice health, you're also sacrificing performance. Not true. Like, I'll take a little higher triglycerides and I'll beat you on stage because I'm 50 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
Fair enough. That's bodybuilding, right?
That's fair.
So I think it comes down to knowing what you're getting into and making sure that everyone is going into it with eyes wide open. You know, I think sometimes the problem is like if we're going to go with this example of, bodybuilding, people will have it in their head that anabolic steroid use or polypharmacy has no health risks.
Right.
And that's not the case either. It's certainly not like roid rage and kill your family after you do your first cycle kind of thing. But like
there's going to be some effects.
Well, absolutely, and no one studied the kind of polypharmacy and dosages that are required at that level. And there's a surprisingly high number of cardiovascular deaths in high-level enhanced bodybuilding. So, like, if you talk to anyone who's knowledgeable on this type of thing, like John Meadows or Mike Israetel, or other people like that, they will tell you these are drugs, they have side effects, and there is health costs and potential consequences of it. But I just think people should be well informed whatever they're doing, like you were talking about those other people. And I believe the same thing is true of natural bodybuilding. I encourage people to fully be aware of the risks of even doing a well-balanced prep where you put your family and holistic goals. They're considered.
Yes.
You take time to diet. You follow an evidence-based approach. All that stuff that we promote at 3DMJ. I also tell people, and you're still going to be incredibly hungry, potentially have no libido, have disordered sleep, have ankle edema randomly, potentially be depressed at various times, have a bit of an emotional roller coaster, and you might feel social anxiety or just a sense of apathy. Like, all these things just happen as a consequence of doing all that. And it also might be worth it and fun.
Yes.
It's something that you want to pursue for a lifetime. I would say it's probably not the case for 95% of people.
Right. Do you think 95% of people who attempt to prep, or?
No, because I think if you know all of that and then you do attempt to prep, it's a greater likelihood that you are someone who might enjoy that. Yeah. Or like the challenge of that.
Yes.
Or like for me, I pushing myself to that point where I'm at the extremes of my own physiological and psychological limits at times, I find is a really good catalyst for figuring out who I am, what I care about, making changes, pushing my boundaries to figure out what I can accomplish and what I'm capable of,
right.
And reminding me of what I value in life. It's a very strange way to find those things, but I don't think it's that much stranger than people who want to climb Kilimanjaro or run until they get shin splints.
Yeah. It's like you're taking micro risks instead of one big risk.
Yeah, it's a different way to push yourself.
Yes.
And all sports have risks. I think people aren't going to stop playing rugby because of traumatic brain injury. It'll be around.
Guaranteed, especially here.
Exactly. People haven't stopped playing baseball because of rotator cuff injuries. People haven't stopped doing dance because of, you can think of numerous examples.
Even chess, RSI maybe, something like that.
There you go.
What about, because I think, especially, there's a lot of parallels that I draw to that with work. Because it's like I remember when I was in the period of time in my life where I'd be working the hardest, making the most of every minute, just hustle, Gary V mindset. And it was like, I felt like I didn't get shit done. Maybe I got a lot done in hindsight, but I didn't feel like I was getting anything done. Right now, I'm like, I just coming here, I was sitting on the ferry and I was just sitting there, I was just sitting there. And I wasn't feeling like, oh shit, you should be sending emails or something. You should be editing a podcast. Like, no, just fucking sit there. And it's like, I feel like that has its own value. Because even the podcast I was talking about Catherine yesterday, and it was quite interesting how we at the end, we sort of drew it back to, it's very valuable to have that time to just sort of sit there and ponder and just sort of think about all sorts of things, because I feel like that leads to nuanced opinions, and then you begin to understand your own context, and then what you should do and how you can progress and how you can be happy and all these sort of things. And I feel like I've overlooked it for a long time, I think, because I think, I want to be successful. how do you be successful? Work hard. But I don't think it's that simple. And there's so many caveats to that. One thing that I would like to touch on is when for someone like yourself, you quite enjoy bodybuilding and powerlifting. Obviously, it's something that you're quite fond of. Yeah. And I've heard some people say the statement: does it always feel like work? No matter what you do, it's going to be hard. It's going to be work. And even for me with the podcast, even if I never earned $1 from it in my life, I could not give it up. And I'm probably going to end up doing like 1,000 episodes. And it's just very, very rarely is it draining. It's just, it brings me to tears sometimes how much I love it. And it blows my mind. And I feel like, same with weightlifting, it's just like, completely blows my mind. Do you feel as though, does coaching get, obviously it's tough, but does it get like, fuck, I don't want to do this?
Coaching.
Just all of it. All of coaching, doing podcasts, educating, everything in the realm of the work that you do.
Well, I mean, it's not all the same. And I think that's a really valuable lesson right there, is that if you're someone who wants to coach or put out information or be a fitness professional, that there's a lot of different ways to do it. And depending on your temperament, your skill set, where you shine and where you're the most confident and where you're the most competent, they have different emotional costs associated with doing things that will lead to your goal.
Right.
So let's say you have the big picture goal of making the world a better place and helping people be healthier and having, make sure they have less barriers in their life to be the best version of themselves. That's right. Hopefully what most fitness professionals are trying to accomplish in some way. And it might be within a specific niche of people who like to also do that via CrossFit, bodybuilding, powerlifting, endurance athlete, whatever. So if that is your goal, that doesn't necessarily mean that writing a blog post is just as easy or just as fulfilling or just as valuable to your followers as doing a podcast or having an Instagram post. You have to figure out whether you are better at and like more short form or long form content where you can better express yourself, and what takes up more time and energy, so that what might be good but takes so much out of you that you can't do enough.
Yeah. So,
for example, I probably appear on, I actually figured it out. I appear on about 2 podcasts a week on average, which is silly. That's like 150 hours a year of podcasting.
That's more than me.
It's silly, right? And that is not tiring or fatiguing. I show up, I talk about stuff I love. I'm an external processor. I'm an extrovert. I normally get to talk to someone who also likes to talk about that stuff. So I make useful connections. I figure things out, and I find a way to expand the Venn diagram of people I can influence and affect and spread the message to, because I'm not only using my own network to get the word out. And even when it's a smaller podcast and someone who doesn't have a huge following, I'm potentially helping someone who can then do good work, gain their own following. So it's productive work, it's rewarding work, and importantly, it's not draining. It's restricted to that hour. I don't have to prep for it, and I go right back into the next part of my day.
Yeah.
However, if I write a 3,000 word article, that will take me a couple days.
Yeah.
And then I'll need a couple days of not doing much to be okay afterwards.
Yeah.
So I write, basically 1 blog post a month for 3DMJ, and then I produce 2 written articles a month for Mass.
Yeah.
Those 3 articles that's it, and I probably produce one every 3 months. I produce maybe a contribution to or an entirely my own scientific publication, which are even more prep because you have to read everything about it. There might be research that you had to do first to then write about it. So that takes a ton of work. I do it still because I think there's value in it. It reaches a different group of people, all that stuff. And you can save things, and it's there always to go back and check. It has different value, sometimes overlapping value, but different. Likewise, making a post every day at 8 a.m. On my Instagram, when I know that most people are looking at my profile, that's another form of content. So those are all different things, and they have different costs, and some of them fatigue me, some of them don't. I largely just don't do the shit that tires me out or that I don't like.
Yeah.
Like, you will rarely see me on Facebook. I got recently posted on Facebook and got a ton of views and likes on something, but it was actually just the blog post pasted into my update, you know?
Yeah.
So that's cheating, right? And coaching I get a lot out of, but I also, it does weigh on me because it's people with expectations for me, and people who have a goal they really care about, and there's an emotional cost to that. So I just know I have to limit that. So I typically have no more than, say, 5 clients at any given time. When I used to have it as high as 30 to 40 back in the day. So I've come to realize that I love coaching. I'm not going to stop coaching. I am a coach. It's part of who I am. But at the same time, I just can't do it to the same degree I can do other stuff.
Yes.
So
I can imagine it's very fatiguing because it's if you make a mistake, or if, I guess it's very context dependent with everything in coaching, because the person is a person. They're not a algorithm to fix or whatever. They're not a math problem.
No.
I can imagine that. I am not a coach yet, but hopefully in the future, once I feel I am ready, if that is a point in time, you know. But yeah, would you have any advice for me or someone in my similar position wanting to do something like yourself, wanting to basically be able to survive off? Would you call yourself a content creator primarily, an educator?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Science communicator, educator. I have my finger in a lot of pies. I'm not necessarily what should be modeled after. You know, like I'm going to do podcasts, a blog, a subscription-based service, write a book, do research, coach. Like, maybe just pick one or two. I just have trouble not doing it all. You know, so I think I'm unique and weird and likely not optimal in that way, or at least it's something to manipulate, you know, or not to manipulate, to emulate, I should say.
Right.
And not even just for a financial goal, but from a learning to be good at the things you're good at. You know?
Do you not think, since you're already so... Well, I guess there is someone like Joe Rogan where he's done 1,000 podcasts, all 3 hours long, something like that. And he's just the best podcaster in the world, in my opinion, or one of. And I guess that's a good argument for why it could be niche. But do you not think, since it's all bodybuilding and powerlifting and nutrition, do you not think that makes up for that?
For me, it does. That's what makes sense for me, because that's I draw on the same well of passion, which for me, it's pretty freaking deep, you know.
It's strange how moving a barbell and getting jacked and shredded can be so deep and so fulfilling. It still blows my mind.
It's weird, and I've just embraced it, and it's just who I am. It's like, whatever, you know. I get that my whole life, my education, my career, and my personal life all centers around moving things against gravity and manipulating nutrition. But it's who I am, so I'm all good with it. But no, I think for me that's why it works, because it all feeds the same animal and comes from the same well. So, but yeah, my advice would be really try to not listen to the voice that has that sense of urgency that says you need to be ready now, you have to be an expert now. I think it's the way social media moves and how people rise to prominence, fall, how social media changes, how fads come and go even faster now. That speed is largely, frankly, it's bullshit. That if you try to match that speed, or if you think that's the speed you have to go at, that will doom you to mediocrity, because it won't give you the time to do the deep work necessary to become a master of your craft. And you don't have to be a master of your craft to have any value. You know, someone who's been in fitness for 3 years and is humble but shares what they've learned can help someone new to fitness immensely. You can completely change their life. It's just a matter of respecting where you're at in your career and making sure that your content and your reach and what you expect and try to do matches that. Early success for someone who really wants to help people is not really early success. Like if you blew up somehow, a lot of the times if you look at who blows up really early, they just have like God-given or genetically blessed physique, but they don't have much to say yet. And you can't tell people, hey, have great genetics. And so they just say what they've done, or they say their current beliefs. You get the ramblings or the thoughts or the experiences of someone who is just like anybody else who started lifting. They just got more out of it.
Do you feel like it's almost a negative because then they have, I guess they've been lucky and drawn a card, and then it's a good card, and then it's required, obviously there's been work, but it's required less skill than would possibly otherwise be needed to get there. And then I feel like ego from there would limit. This is why I love that book so much, because it's sort of, I think ego would limit a lot of people from further growing from there.
I think it's human nature to do what you've been rewarded for. So if you find that it doesn't really matter what you say, and your physique is so good you can just display it, that you don't emphasize your weak points. You keep training because that's been working, and you probably do train hard, and you get more out of it than most, so you're lucky in that way. And that can be great for a competitor, because then each level of competition as you go up, you find you have to work harder to stay with people. So that's how a quote-unquote thoroughbred can turn into a thoroughbred and a workhorse, and that's really what world champions are. But for someone with a normal temperament, someone who isn't necessarily really, really naturally insightful, or who doesn't second guess things a lot, which it's a double-edged sword, but it has value. It's very easy just to not grow and just put out poor content, or incorrect content. So I think that can be unfortunate, because if you think about it, we see a largely new sea of faces every 3 to 5 years in the fitness scene, at least in like the popular fitness scene, right? And we bitch and moan about them, and we get mad at them, and we call them charlatans, and we say they're fitness flops or whatever. But also think about it from their perspective. They're someone who picked up the weights, had great gains, they got a lot of accolades, a lot of respect. Everyone started asking them questions, encouraging them to step into the role of an expert. They make a social media account. It blows up. People offer them sponsorships. People offer them money. People ask them to wear their clothes, take their supplements, buy their products, promote this. They're maybe in their early 20s typically. And maybe, and why wouldn't they think that they know something? They're getting praise. There's a lot of people saying, you've helped me, you've inspired me. They become, it's difficult to expect them to do much else. I'm glad that when I was 22, 23, when I first started lifting, that I didn't just absolutely overnight have an amazing physique. And then I'm glad that it was 2005, not like after Instagram existed, because I do think I probably would have gone that direction, and I would have thought I knew more than I actually knew. I don't know that I would have seen the same need to get an education. I think that can very easily lead someone down a path of mediocrity that they don't even realize. And then they look up 3 to 5 years later, and they're a little older, someone else new on the block, someone who's a little bit younger, more aware of how to use social media, has a better connection to the current fitness trends, and they're no longer the next best thing. They still have a large following, but they're noticing a decreased engagement over time. So that kind of overnight success is typically short-term success. And a retardation of the learning process of what you couldn't get to. So
it's almost quite a tragic thing.
So I think
it's a bit scary, because I even think for myself, I'm not sure if you're aware of my story, but it's quite, I think it's the kind of story where you could milk, if I really wanted to milk it, I think I could. And I'm glad that I've come in contact with people like yourself and other people that have sort of taught me, like, the long game is probably more beneficial, and I think you'll probably change more lives that way and actually help more people that way, and your name will be remembered better and remembered with a better tone.
Like what do you have to think about? You can reach a height without standing on much. Do you want to be on stilts, or do you want to be on like really solid foundation of years? This is no secret. I kind of popped onto the scene right around 2012 when when after coaching Matt Ogus, he put me on his channel and asked me questions. And
Yes.
and in 2012, I was fortunate to have that been the time point, because I had, gotten my master's degree, my bachelor's degree at that point. I'd coached a couple hundred people. I'd been a personal trainer since 2005. I had taught students, personal training students.
Yes.
I'd worked in multiple different training environments, and I'd been on stage 9 times, and I'd done like 15 meets.
Yeah.
And I dabbled in Olympic weightlifting. And that was 6 years ago, If I had gotten that opportunity in 2010 even, I really think I would have blown it. Or I would be looking back at those videos and going, shit, that's some crappy content.
Right.
I look back today and I go like, it's not bad. Like there's some stuff in there that I don't agree with anymore. Like the whole anterior pelvic tilt thing, I don't really even think matters, But I was kind of down the NASM, corrective exercise specialist, rabbit hole a little bit at that time.
Right.
And I wasn't that great at understanding that was kind of outside my scope and my understanding of research. But most of the videos and most of the things I said back then, I think are largely accurate, still helpful. I think I presented the information well. I didn't overstate claims. And man, I would just be so disappointed in myself if that had been 2 years earlier. So yeah, I think I'm actually quite fortunate that I didn't get the opportunity to screw myself over.
Right.
Yeah,
I can definitely relate to that, because I used to want to be that. I used to want to try and I would try and educate, and I would Google the topic before I fucking talked about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? And it's just, I cringe so hard at it now, but I'm glad now that I can look back at. If I listen back to some of the podcasts I've done, I'm not too embarrassed. And
that's great.
I think it's a good marker. I'm not like visibly cringing in everything that I say.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can definitely relate to how almost scary that would have been if you, or even cringe that would have been for yourself. Like if it happened in 2008 even, then it would have been like you might have just become a train wreck and then being the influencer or whatever, and then
08, I was just a guy who had done one season and wanted to maybe get like a sponsorship,
right. Yeah.
And wanted to have an awesome physique and be Mr. Natural Olympia.
Yeah.
That was that would have been where it could have gone very bad.
Right. That's the thing that.
Unfortunately, my physique wasn't that good, and there was no Instagram, so.
That's the thing. It's crazy to hear even like people like yourself say that, because it's like, I feel like we always think, oh, Eric Helms, he must have always been go to uni, get a PhD, like that sort of we would have always seen that as that must have been the path. But it's like there's so much. Everyone's an idiot at some point.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like that's the thing. Like, I think there's still so many things where I can see and I still do it, and I know I'm doing it at the time, and I'm like, James, you're being a retard. But it's like there's times where I know that I'm doing something wrong, but I still do it, and then I know the day after, like, shit, I did that, and then it's still happening, and I know it'll still happen. And do you still find that you'll cringe at yourself 6 months prior, or do you find it's relatively not that bad? Because
it's a matter of how hard you cringe, right?
Right. Okay.
So, like I said, like I look back at that anterior pelvic tilt video, and I'm like, I wouldn't mind if that wasn't on the internet, And there are a few things like that.
Yes.
And I definitely, especially when it comes to clients, I think of things that I just didn't have enough tools in my belt to help them at that time, and they were the ones who suffered for it.
Yes.
So that keeps me awake at night. And you're doing something wrong if you can't look back and see how you could improve. But at the same time, you also don't want to, if the closest to right you can get is being humble and staying in your lane, and also being confident in what you do know. You can't also you also can't be, if you're trying to help people, you can't be paralyzed by your own awareness of what you don't know.
Yeah.
You just have to speak honestly, like I said, probabilistically, not in absolutes. Give context where appropriate, and just state the fact that this is not the end all be all, and things will change.
Yes.
And then also speak confidently about what you do know and be open to change. And I think that's as close as you can get to minimizing like the size of your cringes over time. I would say the vast majority of my work since somewhere around 2011, 2012, I'd say like 80% of it, I'm like, that's a good body of work, you know?
Right.
I wrote a recent blog article called 7 Things I've Changed My Mind About. There could have been more, maybe 10 or something like that, but it's going to happen. There's no way around it, and you want that to happen. Your mind should change. And I think the key point is that you don't want to present yourself as someone who's always right, or as a guru or who can't be wrong.
Yeah.
And you especially don't want to market yourself that way, because then you will have a tendency towards finding a way to stay right.
Yeah. Instead of actually figuring out what could possibly be correct. And
absolutely.
Then there's ego behind it, and there's a reason to not correct yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a dangerous thing.
Oh yeah, if you put yourself up as I'm the smartest guy in any room I'm in, or gal, then there is a risk to being wrong.
Yeah.
If you put yourself up as someone who is doing the best they can to have the best information, and is always seeking learning and is open to being wrong, then you're much less likely to get in your own way. That, like you said, ego is the enemy, right? So, and this happens in the evidence-based community too. Like, I know I'm the best research guy, well then, but that still means you can't be wrong, right? Your predictions about where the research should go, or your interpretation, is the one that has to be right. And if someone disagrees with your interpretation of research, that means either they're incompetent or immoral or something like that, or lying, And if those are the only options, that means you need to look inward. Like, if the only way you can figure out how someone's disagreeing with you is they're either a bad person or an idiot, maybe the problem is in the mirror, not everywhere else.
Yes, I completely agree. And then I think we'll finish off with one more question. So, again, going back to the whole thing, like, everyone was an idiot once. We don't all, especially when you're 19. And there's people I've talked to recently where I look up to them and I'm like, holy shit, how could I ever be at that level? Oh my God. And just think, wow, they are just insane role models for me. And I'll still hear them sort of say, I kind of still don't know where I'm going. And then that's the thing. So the question that I want to ask is, back then, did you know where you were heading? Did you know the general idea where you wanted to end up? And let's say, was there any significant moment where you were like, holy shit, where am I going? Especially, let's say, pre-Matt Ogus era, before you sort of had any sort of recognition. Was there a lot of doubt and sort of thinking, oh shit, will I go anywhere ever?
Man, I have to say I had a few life experiences that I was really lucky to have. Not that they were all positive at the time, but when I started on my fitness career, that was 2005, and that means I was 22, 23.
Right.
So I had come out of high school and gone into the military with an expectation of having a certain career that then I realized I did not want.
Yes.
And I spent 4 years doing a career enlistment, doing something I didn't want to do anymore. And then I tried music, and that flopped as well. So I realized that whatever I did next, I didn't want to stop or get fearful and pull out, just kind of like what I felt like I did with the previous things. I was like, I'm going to go all chips in. And I was like, there's risks. Like, the safe option would have been to stay in the field I was in and just be unhappy but make money and be able to pay the bills. But I realized that was much worse than being poor and doing something I liked. Yes. So it was because of that experience, I didn't have that fear-driven need for a quote-unquote safety net.
Yes.
And it was also good to see the economy crash shortly after that, because I realized that even some of the most safe investments we thought we had, like real estate or people who had jobs for 20, 30 years, can get laid off in a moment's notice. Like, just because there's a big company out there doesn't make it immune to anything. Yes. So I had no illusions that I needed safety. And I was like, all right, well, all chips are going to go in. I'm just going to do what I love. I think also because I had figured out what I didn't want to do and gone down some other paths, I allowed myself just to follow my passion. Yes. Which at the time I started lifting weights, and I was like, man, this is all I care about. I wonder if I can make this into a career. It took a few years to really figure it out, but in 2009, I specifically remember when I formed 3DMJ with Jeff, Berto, and Brad, that I was like, you know what, Dr. Joe Klimczewski, Lane Norton, they're doing something I want to do. They are science communicators and coaches and evidence-based practitioners in natural bodybuilding and powerlifting. And that's, actually this is pre-powerlifting for Lane, but I was into powerlifting and I wanted to get into that too. So that was my archetype at the start.
Mm.
And then getting involved in the science side of it, that really opened my eyes. So I was fortunate that when I started down the path in 2009, I had a clear goal of the archetype of who I was trying to become.
Right. So did you sort of see them as role models and sort of generally aim in that direction?
I don't know that I was aiming at them, but I think I realized, okay, that's a thing.
Yes.
So
yes.
what's the Eric Helms version of that?
Right.
Like,
yes.
There's ways that they operate that is unique to them. There are values they have that are unique to them, and there are strengths and weaknesses that are unique to them. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do that, but we're going to, like, I think from the start, 3D Muscle Journey, I really wanted to not just be science. Like, I thought that was really missing some of the humanity of the experience of bodybuilding.
Yes.
And at the time, people were not sharing the fact that they were binging post-show or how hard contest prep was. It was all kind of roses and it was exactly like never admit weakness. Like, I love to be hungry or stuff like there was this kind of like 2006, 2007, like you'd log your prep.
There was no one really saying shit is hard and there's issues.
Exactly. It's hard. It's supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to be easy. It doesn't need to be harder than it needs to be, but we should be honest about what we're experiencing, and maybe we can make it better. And we can come together around the difficulty and the pushing and the striving that we're all a part of. So anyway, that was a big part of 3D Muscle Journey from the start, doing it for a bigger purpose. So obviously I had that kind of archetypal inspiration and even just awareness that was possible driving me. And that has been the same for 10 years now, or close to it, I guess. We got another month or two before it's 2019. Crazy. But I think from the start, I had a shared vision with the rest of the 3DMJ founders that helped me figure out what that archetype would look like with our values.
Yes.
So I don't know if I had fear. I really don't think I had a whole lot of fear because I had the shared courage of the whole crew.
Yes.
And I think we were just focusing on what we could do at that time and what was our skill set.
Yes.
And it was a matter of just building it up slowly, working with people and getting better at our craft and being honest about where we were at. Yeah. And that has paid off. So we're not shining examples of mainstream fitness success by any means, but if you look at the goals we set out in 2009 when we started 3DMJ versus where we are today and the growth we've had, it's been largely linear. There's been plateaus, which Andrea largely helped us break and basically just reminded us, like, hey, what are you trying to do? Is this the best way to do it? And we went, no, probably not. Like, we like your ideas, come on board. So it's been a straight path for the most part with some potential hitting the pause button. And it's not like we weren't working then, it was just that we weren't necessarily growing.
Yes. So I think it's been a similar thing for myself, and obviously I'm still very new to this, so I'm only like a year and a half into this whole podcasting thing, but it's a very similar thing of like only recently I've started experiencing a lot of growth for me, and it feels like a dream.
It's awesome.
It's crazy. It blows my mind, and there was a long period of plateau, and then I just don't even get that it's real. And for me, the fact that it's weird to think, but the fact that someone like yourself hasn't just been born at your age, at the point you're at, like it actually happens in a journey. Like it's not just the movie, you know. It's actually reality, which I think is hard for a lot of people to grasp. Because when we look at, I think people put people like yourself and people like, I don't know, who's a really famous person, Johnny Depp, in the same bucket.
Oh wow!
And, yeah. Do you get what I mean? Though it's like they think that it is just this unattainable thing that only special people can do, and I think it puts a lot of people off who would be phenomenal at doing something similar. And I've only realized in the last 6 months or so that, like, wow, these people are actually humans, you know? Like,
yeah, I think it's important to kind of going back to some of the things we talked about is to not put yourself on a pedestal.
Yes.
Like, I think a lot of people make that worse by They have these great photographers. They have, like you said, the right filter, maybe even Photoshop. They diet down for photo shoots. They go to exquisite locations and they look a certain way. They have great graphic content and all that stuff. They portray themselves as these non-humans. And that doesn't make sense to me. If your goal is to help people, you want to be relatable.
Yeah.
You want to be attainable.
Yeah.
You want to be something that is also inspiring.
Yes.
But I think you probably want to be inspiring in a way that is not potentially debilitating to people.
Yeah.
Right?
This is why I do a lot of stories on Instagram, and I try to filter them as little as possible.
Yeah.
And they're incredibly long. But it's just me, like, sitting in my room talking about something that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's no filter on it, and I think it shows people I'm real.
Yeah, you're just being a human.
Yeah, and I think people love that. And that's why I think that's why podcast is such a good medium, because it's very hard to be fake on a podcast because you're there for an hour.
I try really hard. It's difficult.
It's so hard.
No, 100%. I think having that long form content, being able to be someone who is human, especially like a lot of what I do, I don't just give content to people who want to start lifting weights or who are bodybuilders and powerlifters. Obviously, there's a ton of that. But I also give a lot of content to people who are trainers, people who are trying to help other people. So I think it should be a difficult role to step into emotionally, where you're going to go, right, I'm going to actually help you. I'm going to put your health in my hands to some degree. I'm going to be a mentor for you for the most important thing, the limiter on everything we do in life, whether we're going to die now, right, or how able-bodied we're going to be throughout our life. That's something that we need to take seriously, right? So people who are trainers or who are coaches or who are nutritionists or who are health and fitness up-and-coming researchers or students, they're going to have to get uncomfortable and be in that role eventually or at some point, or find the confidence to do that. And if I don't want them to think, oh, I have to have a PhD, 2 master's degrees, a pro card, and have done 20 meets to help people. That's like not true at all, right? So I also want people to understand that they have value to give now, and what's the best way to see that in themselves, have some confidence. So like, if you put yourself on a pedestal, if you make yourself seem like a superhuman, that doesn't help people.
It's like, when can you grow from there?
Exactly.
And it's like, I think Steve's a great example, because it's like, he doesn't have a degree or anything, but he's obviously still a phenomenal coach.
Yes.
And I think people...
And you can see his journey.
Yeah.
You can see him coming from being like a younger man to being an older man. Now he's old, but he's less young, right? And just like the progression of his content, the progression of his podcasting skills, the nuances in what he says about coaching, the progression of his own journey as an athlete. I think all of those things in the story he shares, Steve does a great job of that. Yeah. And I think he's only going to get better. Because he's very much down to earth and in tune with where he was, and he understands that it leads to where he is. There's nothing wrong with where he was before, so it doesn't mean he needs to pretend it didn't exist or anything like that, or try to be a different person. You know, I think that's a mistake a lot of people get trapped in. So I
try to almost let people know, like whenever I'm talking about my past or my journey, like I've been on a few podcasts recently where I was the one being interviewed, and it was like, and then I was asked to explain my story, and I tried to make it clear that I used to be an idiot. I'm still an idiot, just less, hopefully.
Sure.
And I think that's a very important thing to acknowledge. And like all this stuff just blows my mind daily. Like, and I just still can't even believe that it's real. Like, I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's because I'm talking to people that I'm like, wow, that person's like famous, you know, like, and maybe it's that, but there's just something about it that it just seems like I'm cheating at life or something. Like I've found an easy way to just have a happy life or something, or just, I don't know, it just feels, but I don't know, maybe I'm just super appreciative or some shit, but it just blows my mind. Like every day And I just can't comprehend how everyone isn't doing it. Like, this is where I'm sort of trying to take the podcast. I'm trying to take it to a place where it's like, hey, you can literally do whatever you want, but it'll just take like 7 years.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But you got to understand that it'll take 7 years. You can't just make 2 vlogs on YouTube when you're a normal person and expect people to give a fuck. Because no one will, and that's fine.
Yeah. I don't know what the secret to success or happiness is, and I know that they can happen separately. We've all heard of the business executive who shoots themselves randomly, who've focused a life on achievement but not necessarily found any self-fulfillment. But I can tell you that people who I observe and the times in my life when I am happy and also feel fulfilled is when I am grateful for what I've accomplished, but also acutely aware of the hard work I've done and that I will have to do to move forward.
Yes.
So that I am both challenged and grateful for where I was. And I think there is parallels with that with physique development. You know, like the most unhappy, most frustrated people who, like, for example, take steroids for the wrong reasons, you know, because they're unhappy with their physique or something like that, which is, I think is tragic, is they're focused on comparing themselves to others and hating where they are, not appreciating the work they've done to get somewhere, and feeling like it's all been a waste, and only feeling where they should be and judging themselves. Like, I think you got to figure out what fuel are you putting in your gas tank. If it's self-loathing and inadequacy, that can fuel your car, but I don't think you'll like where you're going to get. Or you're going to get there and you might have achieved something, but it won't have the same value. So
I don't think that there'll be a lot of things. Say if it's a town, there'll be a lot of shops missing in the town. There'll be a lot of things missing.
Absolutely.
I think you really would love Ryan Holiday's work. He's the author of Ego is the Enemy. Like, it's just...
I've read The Perennial Seller.
Oh, fantastic.
Great
I think I saw you mention it on a podcast a while ago. It was I love that book as well, because it illustrates a lot of this as well. Why the long game is so beneficial. And it's so fulfilling. And it's way slower, but that's fine. But I think if you play the short game, it's dangerous. And it's...
Well, you won't have real value to add. You won't be able to look back and be like, you'll be like, I got a lot of followers. And I have some really good pictures of when I was in my 20s and 30s.
But
and
what does that do?
Then all my followers followed someone else afterwards. And actually, most of my followers weren't even the same people over time because they moved on while I didn't to more important, useful content that helped them in their fitness career.
I feel like that because I've noticed that so much of myself. When I first started, I'd follow those influencers, and then now, obviously there's not right and wrong people to follow, but I feel like the people that I want to follow are more, like they're growing. I can see them evolving, and
they're not static.
And I feel like it's just much more beneficial, and that's what I aspire to be like and want to emulate in some form. Just that whole continuously growing and doing things for the right reasons and just putting out good content and putting generally like leaving things better than you found them. Just the whole industry.
That's what it's all about.
And I think especially myself, I focus a lot on how bad the industry is and how much you can go into a gym and see someone quarter leg pressing and with the whole thing on, and
it's all perspective though, right? Like going back to the 1930s, there weren't gyms, like there was like a gym in New York, sometimes there are certain parts of Auckland where you'd be like, wait, is that another Les Mills? Like, isn't that too close to the other Les Mills?
Literally.
There are 2 blocks and 2 gyms sometimes, anyone can go to the gym in almost any country these days. Obviously, there are not all first world nations, but there are people who spend time in the gym of all walks of life. Man, I think we also have to kind of appreciate the fact that there are millions of people who are right or in the most optimal or least optimal or least or most healthy way engaged with fitness, right? And
that's probably beneficial for the most part.
You'd think.
I'd hope.
Yeah,
maybe not for the joints, but for a lot of it,
yeah,
it's probably beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, sure. The question is it would be better if he wasn't in the gym at all versus doing quarter squats.
That's the thing, yeah.
And will he be, in 10 years, do you think he'll be doing quarter squats with?
I fucking hope not. I swear to God.
It may be that he'll be able to talk to other people with some personal perspective on that. You know, like, hey, I used to do that.
I hope so.
Yeah, so people aren't static.
I dearly, dearly hope so. But so I'd like to finish it off with what would be your recommendations of the main places that you would. I've asked you this before. What would be? Let's stay away from fitness, just for general life. If it's books, if it's people, if it's just general people that you've learned from, where would be the main place that you think you can just generally learn from?
So the problem is my life largely consists of like the physical culture community, to put it broadly, or fitness stuff and bodybuilding. But yeah, you know, things that have had a big impact on me. Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist is a book,
right,
unrelated to fitness, that I find emphasizes self-discovery.
Right.
Dan Millman's Way of the Peaceful Warrior. I also got a lot out of that.
Right.
Siddhartha is a great book. Just things that generally have to do with self-reflection and finding meaning in life, I think, can drive you to the right place. I'm trying to think of other things that have had an impact on me. The Perennial Seller, for anyone, because that's not a fitness book. That's if you're an artist, a writer, a painter, a sculptor, a podcaster, or whatever the hell I do, you know, that is relevant. If you're someone who has creativity or you're producing something, physical or content, I think there's a lot of value in that book and that perspective. You know, meditation has been something on and off in my life that has been very valuable. You were talking about just sitting on the ferry, coming over, and self-reflection, and realizing that there's a value in not always doing something. That we created this ridiculous world and the society, and it's, you know, I think we're in billions of stars among billions of galaxies, tiny specks of life sitting on this planet.
We are a floating circle.
Exactly.
Effectively, which is fucking crazy.
Right? So, yeah, maybe just take some time and appreciate being and get yourself outside of the headspace of being an ant in human society. I think a lot of my appreciation and curiosity comes from that I've avidly read science fiction and fantasy since I was able to read.
Right.
And I appreciate physics and things like that. I'm not like an expert at all, but I really appreciate astronomy and the concepts that are presented and challenged in science fiction. I think that's a really good idea.
What would be some of your favorite science fiction?
Yeah, so I think Dan Simmons' Endymion, Hyperion. I think those are 4 books, 3 or 4 books. That's a really good series. I really enjoyed Ringworld. That's a classic. Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I've read those books a number of times on the fantasy side of things.
Is that why you moved here?
Absolutely. Yeah. PhD was secondary. Yeah. It's Peter Jackson all the way, man. So those are a few science fiction books I really like. But I've probably read 1 to 2 a month since I was 13 or something like that.
Right.
And I'm
do you
35.
Still?
Oh yeah,
wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Good one. John Scalzi, Old Man's War. That's a really good book that I like. Man, I can think of so many. I could just list books for an hour. I don't know how helpful that would be. So.
That'd be a good podcast.
Yeah, it would be.
Where can people find you, 3DMJ, and make sure they're not committing a heinous crime anymore?
Yeah, so to get off the war crime list of James here, I would go to 3dmusclejourney.com. That's kind of the one-stop shop for all of our stuff. There'll be links to the Muscle and Strength Pyramids, which are my books, monthly applications in Strength Sport, which is our subscription-based research review to stay up to date. Links to our podcast and our blogs are there, of course. And then if you want to follow me on Instagram for those daily doses of short-form content and sometimes pictures of jacked dudes and dudettes from the pre-steroid era, you want to follow me on @Helms3DMJ. And that's pretty much it.
Sort of.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Student Side Hustle. I would appreciate so much if you would leave a review if you'd like to hear more of what I'm saying. Then I would love if you would follow me on Instagram or check out my other social media, all linked in the show notes. And again, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening and study hard.